My name is James Sneddon. I'm the controller of the City of York.
What did you do with the York Dispatch?
I was editor and publisher.
And is the York Dispatch, is that a daily?
That is a daily afternoon newspaper.
And can you give me a time frame that you were editor and publisher?
April of 1995. I'm not quite sure what the exact date was, until March of 1998.
You obviously were editor and publisher of the York Dispatch in or around Labor Day 1996.
Correct.
Correct. And over that Labor Day weekend 1996, was there an event involving, I think it was State Senator Delp, that became newsworthy?
Correct. There was an incident in which Dan Delp and his aide, whose name is eluding me at the moment, had arranged to party with a couple of prostitutes. And they arranged for the prostitutes through an individual, a couple of individuals, David Ness and Dick Parks, and paid for the prostitutes. They spent a portion of the day on a boat, and subsequent to the boat, they went to Dan Delp's home, went to Harrisburg, partied in Harrisburg, and after the party in Harrisburg, returned to Delp's home and spent some time again at Delp's home and left sometime the next morning. I know about that because there was a point in time, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was sometime in the spring of '97, perhaps April, that one of the sports reporters, who was a friend of a reporter at the Harrisburg Patriot, came and said that the reporter had told her that he had a story that was going to blow the lid off of City Hall and the county government in York County. We had no idea what that person was talking about, and he did not reveal any additional information to her. Subsequent to that, J.P. Kurish, who I believe was city editor at the time, had a conversation at a political meeting. JP's beat was to cover politics, and he did that, in which someone mentioned that there was an incident with Dan Delp and some prostitutes. And at that point, we became interested in it. JP made a call, I believe, to Delp's office to ask about the incident, and nothing was forthcoming. Subsequent to that, we received a letter from a Philadelphia attorney stating basically that here were the facts of what had occurred on that Labor Day weekend. And it was a 4-page deposition by Dan Delp and a couple of pages by his aide, which outlined...
And this was a letter you received from a Philadelphia attorney?
Correct. He sent...
An attorney for Mr. Delp?
Correct. Okay. He sent the letter to me as editor. He sent copies to various people. Now, apparently that letter came about because of what the reporter at the Patriot was doing at the time. And had evidently placed not only calls to Delp to tell him what he had in hand, but apparently to the president of the Senate, the senator from Altoona, Jubileer, who just got beaten. And we had subsequently heard that when Delp went in and talked to Jubileer about what was going on, that they felt the best defense at this point in time was to take the offensive, and that they supposedly sent him to the Philadelphia attorney. I in turn took the letter to the Dispatch's lawyer, Niles Benn, who has an office. At that time, it was just across the alley from the Dispatch, and I spent many a many a day in his office after that. And we discussed the letter. Basically, what happened as a result of that letter was that Dan Delp and the attorney laid out a roadmap for us to follow. We didn't have any of that information prior to getting the letter. So now at least we had information that we knew something happened, and here's what Dan said had happened, and was it accurate as to what Dan had said had happened. Subsequent to that, we got immersed, incredibly immersed in the investigation itself. And I need to point out that throughout much of my career, I've been involved with investigative reporting. I've won numerous awards for investigative reporting, so it was almost a natural to have something fall into our laps, and all of a sudden we had a paper trail that we could start to process and follow, which is what we did. Much happened over the next, I want to say, 6 weeks. And we had been able to identify the 2 prostitutes, including the prostitute who had spent time with Dan Delp. We had taken that statement that he prepared and we went through it line by line by line by line to confirm or deny or determine whether or not what he was saying was possible as far as timeline and so on. And there were many areas where we came up with questions and disagreements with the statement itself.
So even though it was presented to you by Mr. Delp's counsel as a truthful statement, you were finding what you perceived to be inaccuracies or flaws in the truth?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. We were finding our own truth at that point in time. The crucial factor, however, was that we felt we needed to get the young woman to talk to us. And we had contacted her, and she finally agreed to give a deposition to our private investigator. Unfortunately, what happened at the point of that was that the Harrisburg Patriot printed its first story, which basically was in my opinion, a very weak story, just basically about 20 inches of copy outlining Dan Delp had a problem and that he had prostitutes and so on.
Now, who was what was the name of the prostitute?
The attorney, the reporter for the Harrisburg Patriot News.
The prostitute.
Was it Alicia Wallstrom?
Yes, Alicia Wallstrom.
Okay.
Was the prostitute. They had printed the story on a Sunday morning, and Niles Benn calls me about 10 o'clock saying, they beat us to the track. You know, the story's already in the paper. And I said, well, that's really going to blow up because the Daily Record's going to have it even before we do. And we're going to be third in line here. He says, well, there's nothing you can do about that.
What is it, Daily Record, a morning?
That's the morning paper. It's in New York, the competing paper. So I hung up, and we had planned to do the deposition of the young woman on Monday. And I was frustrated for a while. I went down to Nixon Park, walked around. So I came home and I called Niles, and I said to Niles, is there any chance that she would do the deposition today? And the reason why I wanted her to do it on Sunday was that if she did the deposition on Sunday, then we could print on Monday.
This Sunday, the day the Patriot made the report. Okay.
Right. So he made some calls, and she agreed to that. So the private investigator took her sworn deposition sometime after 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. I sat down in the office. We had everything ready to go. We just needed to have a verifiable proof in writing. And what we had from her then was 60-some pages of sworn statement that this was the truth as to what happened. They walked that into my office very early. I stayed down there all night. Around 6 a.m., maybe even before 6 a.m., they walked in with the document. We then went through and verified and confirmed what we were about to print with what her statements were in the sworn deposition. And then we went with it. And we had about 4 pages of newsprint based upon what Dan Delp had done and what we produced out of that. Now, there were a lot of things that we had gathered also in relation to this. Documents that came out of the district attorney's office, documents that came out of the courts, that we had in hand that led to all kinds of additional questions. And in our opinion, this was just the start of an investigation, that there was much more that was going to follow after this. The impact of the report was rather stunning on the community because Dan Delp was viewed as an up and rising young star.
In the course of that investigative effort, whether through the affidavit of the prostitute or through any other sources, did information surface about what I'll call a sex ring in York, Pennsylvania?
Indeed.
Okay, and could you tell me a little bit more about that?
What happened in York County was in the early 80s, there was a court case that went before, at the time we were doing this story, he was a retired judge. And he had ruled at the time that masturbation was not a sexual act. And that law held until sometime in the 90s, when there was a case in Wilkes-Barre, I believe, that went to the state Supreme Court and they overturned his opinion. But what that did was it formed the basis for prostitutes, massage parlors of the ilk to get a real foothold in York County. And we discovered during this course of this investigation that there were numerous operations being run, and that David Ness was one of the small-time ones, actually. One of the bigger operations was being run by a guy by the name of Keeney, and we had discovered this because he wound up being arrested, and we went after the court records on Mr. Keeney, and we got documentation, and we had learned that approximately 1.3 or 1.4 million dollars had flowed through his prostitution business over the course of a year, and it became apparent to me at that time that prostitution alone could not have been creating this amount of money for his particular business. Now,
how did you develop that information?
Documentation. We found court records. After he was arrested, there was information that was available through the court system itself. They gave him a, quote, deal. One of the things that happens in this kind of business is that if they arrest somebody, if that person agrees to cooperate, they hold off on the actual court procedures. And apparently he had agreed to cooperate with them on this particular matter, and it was our belief that he must have agreed to cooperate on something larger. And what apparently was happening at the time was that they had made there was a federal case apparently going on in relation to money laundering, drugs and prostitution, none of which the feds would confirm for us. But what happened was that Mr. Keeney wound up committing suicide, and I use that term loosely, in a motel room in a little burg outside of Wilkes-Barre. And he committed suicide by stabbing himself in the chest. We found that very peculiar. We had checked around with some forensic pathologists to question them as to whether or not, how often that they encountered a suicide of this nature. And the best that we could come up with was a person that may have stabbed themselves multiple times. Never a case had surfaced of a single stab wound. The problem was it was a locked room mystery. He was locked inside in the motel room when he committed suicide, and there was no evidence on the video cameras or so on. But we were subsequently told by, that all that could have been worked around. But we didn't. That was not the point of our pursuing of the particular story at this time. This was just another story that surfaced during the part of the process. The question that arose in our mind in relation to that was, how big was this whole sex thing, and was he in Wilkes-Barre because he had been called to testify before another federal grand jury, which was going on up there?
Okay.
Don't know. Never could confirm that one way or the other. Before he died, that's what I was talking about before, they had made this deal.
The deal, okay.
And the assumption was they made the deal because he was willing to testify against people. Now there were, you're taxing my memory here, but there were all kind of related incidents that we had heard about. We developed all kind of sources during this period of time, and there were sources that said that in Keeney's house they had all kind of videotapes. That were taken of people having sex with prostitutes. And that supposedly someone from the district attorney's office who was involved with the arrest showed up at that place, and there were certain things that were, quote, confiscated so that they weren't still left around as potential evidence. And it got extremely, what's the word I'm looking for? Extremely interesting in terms of all of this stuff when Dick Parks wound up committing suicide. Dick Parks was the man who arranged for the prostitutes for Dan Delp. Dick Parks had a special relationship with the district attorney's office at the time.
What do you mean by that?
Great buddies. We had always heard, from at least one prostitute that Dick Parks used to flash a badge that showed he worked for the district attorney's office. He worked with them in various areas. He was also a private investigator at the time. Stan Rebert himself showed up at the day at which Dick Parks applied before the court to get his private investigative license, and Rebert spoke in his behalf. He supposedly was good friends with Bill Graff. They golfed together. Bill Graff was the assistant DA in charge of all the drug investigations. He was also a private investigator for the Anstein law firm and handled various things. And apparently he had somewhat of an interesting past, although we never really got into that particular level. But I can remember talking to people about Dick Parks, and one of the things that I was told at that time was that he used to make the collections of the poker machines,
okay,
and run the collections down to the city of Chester, which made sense to me coming out of Delaware County and the mob influence down in the city of Chester itself and what was going on down there, and the fact with Ernie Priate and the poker machines and the former mayor of Chester going to jail and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it sounded plausible that it could very well be that would be the case, and the time frame fit and all that stuff. So Dick Parks was this guy, and what we found out later was that Dick Parks was pissed because Dan didn't pay the prostitutes enough money. And I can't remember the dollar amount, but it really wasn't much. And one of the girls called Parks to complain, and then Parks called Delp. And apparently Parks recorded the conversation illegally. But that's what the reporter from the Harrisburg Patriot had. Parks went to him. Actually, Parks went to Kostopoulos' firm.
Okay.
I don't know what the direct link was there, but there was a link. Anyway, so Parks goes to Kostopoulos. He gets interviewed by his private eye, Galkenauer. As it turns out later, Galkenauer tells me he interviewed him for about 11 hours. And they checked around, and they felt that they didn't necessarily want to represent the Parks in this case. Parks knew something was coming down, that he was going to get arrested, or something was going to happen. So he was taking a preemptive strike. However, what they did was they put him in touch with the reporter. Was it Pete something?
Shellum?
Yeah, that's who it was. Pete Shellum from the Patriot. And he gave him a copy of the tape, so that he had in possession this tape that he had made of his conversation with Delp.
Okay.
And that was the basis of their story and their information.
Okay.
All of this is coming later. Anyway, Parks ups and commits suicide. Shoots himself in the head. He commits suicide in his backyard. Shoots himself in the head with a gun. And leaves a note to his family. We find out about it in the weirdest way. We get a police report faxed over to us from the Northern Regional Police Department about a shooting in I guess it was Manchester Township, was where he lived. He lived out by the golf course. And the clerk didn't do anything with it, but Mark Scalfaro wandered by and saw it, and saw the name Dick Parks. And I can still remember him running down and coming into my office saying, "Dick Parks committed suicide." Well, we held the press that day, because that was a significant piece of information in the whole Delp thing. He was the one real link that they had to Delp that tied into other areas. And it was always the feeling at that time was that this mysterious they, wanted to stop the investigation as to what was going on. And that Parks was the fish in the pond, that if he got eliminated, it wouldn't go any further.
Now, did this lead to some type, or did somewhere in this process, did the concept of a sex club develop or surface?
Yes, the not Renaissance Club, the Reciprocity Club. Yes, the Reciprocity Club surfaced. There was, when we got into the prostitutes, we started looking at all their arrest records and what was going on. And out of this, additional names would surface all the time. And then we would go and try to track down those additional names. One of the processes of investigative reporting is that...
Where did you develop that name, the Reciprocity Club? Or what was your source on that, or if you remember?
I can't remember for sure, but it could have even came out of the deposition of the prostitute.
Okay.
Or it could have came out of interviews with other prostitutes. But it surfaced somehow from there. And then it surfaced again there was an incident involving a prostitute, or a couple of prostitutes, two prostitutes, in which the DA's office conducted a raid. They set it up in a motel room, and I'd have to go back and look at all the documentation again. We laid it out in stories at the time, in which they were hiding in the closet. There was an overture made to conduct sex, and the DA's office then made the arrest along with, it may have been state police at the time, I can't remember again for sure. But anyway, they made an arrest of 2 prostitutes, and one of the prostitutes, what came out of this was, oh, I know what happened, I know why that occurred, because Dick Parks was ticked off because another guy, Kowalczyk, had used one of his girls, one of his prostitutes, and they wanted to get this girl and Kowalczyk in return. And so they set it up and they conducted the raid, they made the arrest, and they arrested both girls and Kowalczyk. But they screwed up, the wrong girl apparently showed up. So when they get to the DJ's office for the preliminary hearing, all the charges get dropped against her because she wasn't the right girl.
Okay.
So now they've got the other girl, they got Kowalczyk arrested, and we've got more documentation. And now we got Kowalczyk. And he agrees to talk to us. You know, and it was one of those kinds of cases that things just kept spiraling on and on and on. And the further we got into it, the more stuff we kept finding. I mean, there was prostitution all over the place. There was prostitution at a little store just down the street from the dispatch on North George Street on the 2nd floor. They were doing massages and committing sexual acts. In fact, we subsequently found out in checking state police documents that the state police had raided the place. Not raided the place, but they sent an agent in there who had apparently first time around had a sexual act performed and nothing was done. It wasn't until like 6 or 7 months later, when he went back in with another officer at the time, that they filed charges.
Okay.
And the state police officer involved in this case, and here I'm going to ramble, way back in the beginning told our private investigator, you don't want to go there. And there were a number of things then that surfaced in terms of what the state police were doing in terms of prostitution and what was going on there.
Now, do you believe that the state police may have been compromised in this whole situation?
There were documents that we had received that related to prostitution arrests that not only went beyond York County, that there were some allegations involving a police, I want to say lieutenant, but again I can't remember at this particular time, that was in charge of investigations that supposedly related to the kind of stuff that we saw at the massage parlor above the insurance agency down on North George Street, in which a police officer actually received sexual favors. There were comments from prostitutes about how the guys would work them. You know, so yes, there were allegations and things presented to us that related to state police involvement in some of this stuff that was beyond the scope of the law. And there were some peculiar things that occurred with drug arrests that would be dismissed or wiped out. Or there was a case involving a York City police officer, a woman by the name of Hibner, who arrested a guy who was sitting in front of a known crack house in his car, and he had a pipe on his dashboard, and she asked him to get out of the car, and she searched the car, and they found a whole bunch of marijuana and money in the trunk of the car. They arrested him. The case went to trial, and it got dropped. It got thrown out as a quote illegal search. DA's office never objected, never put in a word for the cop. We were told via sources that the DA's office said she was a bad cop, when in fact couldn't be further from the truth. But we then subsequently found out that this same dude that had been arrested had apparently been arrested previously, and also the charges had been dropped. So we didn't know at that point whether he was a snitch or whether he was part of the operation and somebody in the DA's office was part of the operation as far as what was going on. It was a gold mine of information if you knew where to look.
Okay.
And
in your estimation as a journalist, reliable information?
well, we confirmed it more than once.
Okay.
We had to confirm more than once. We would get a tip, and then we would get something. Wasn't necessarily a tip; it would just be information. And then we'd go and try to confirm that particular information. And it stuff kept surfacing and surfacing. It was incredible. And there were things that surfaced that there was one ring, for example, one prostitution offer being done out of above a gay bar on West Market Street, only a block from my house.
Now, was this all, in your understanding, was this all part of this reciprocity club?
No, let me explain what the Reciprocity Club was.
Okay.
The Reciprocity Club apparently began out of a Chamber of Commerce organization
Okay.
in which the guys used to take trips to ball games or so on. And some of the members of this club, I think was called the Renaissance Club, thought it was too tame. They wanted to do something a little bit extra. So they formed their own club called the Reciprocity Club. And they would have outings. They would bring prostitutes. And they would have, there was an outing at a golf course in which they played among the four of them per hole. And whoever would win the hole would get the prostitute. And there were events. There was they apparently rented a restaurant. We never did find out what restaurant it was. And they brought in a greased pig. And they chased the greased pig all over the restaurant. The restaurant was so PO'd that they told them they'll never come back. There were apparently events like that would occur which prostitutes were involved with. And we had been told that members of the DA's office, including Stan Rebert, had been present at some of these Reciprocity Club events, which of course was a violation of the law. And here you have the chief officer in York County, well, not necessarily participating in some way, he's present at the time that this stuff is going on.
Now,
we were told, and it was interesting, Kowalczyk, Reciprocity Club, we never printed anything on it because we couldn't get the extra element of truth to confirm what was going on, and we didn't quite know where the heck that story fit in with all of this at that point in time.
Which story is that?
The Reciprocity Club. We never printed a story about the Reciprocity Club.
Okay.
That isn't to say we wouldn't have printed one if I had remained at the Dispatch and time had gone on and other stuff had continued to surface. We were told that the Reciprocity Club consisted of not the top level of people in York County, but just below them, that there were some prominent business folks that were members of the Reciprocity Club, a realtor. And there was reason to believe that this was accurate based upon the comments we had. But the Daily Record went out. They kept trying to catch up to us, and they couldn't because they didn't set up the means to get the thing going in the first place. And they didn't have the expertise to deal with the kind of investigative reporting that this required. But Kowalczyk talked to them one day, talked to the reporter, and he had a little black book. A little black book had the names of all the Reciprocity Club members in it.
And could you just, Kowalczyk was the, so to speak, competitor?
He was the pimp, yeah,
Okay.
the competitor.
Okay.
He lined guys up for various
Okay.
prostitute
And he
parties and so on
Okay.
that he would conduct. But he had this black book, and apparently had the names of all the Reciprocity Club members in it. And the Daily Record had it, didn't know what the heck the Reciprocity Club was.
The Daily Record had the little black book?
Yeah, they got a copy of the little black book.
Okay.
And they went ahead and then they printed this story about a Reciprocity Club, but not even knowing what the hell it was.
Okay.
So there was no mention of sex, whatever, in there. But at this point, I'm sure there were tons of people in York County that are suddenly really, really worried. Because now this document's in the hand of a newspaper. And even though they didn't know what the hell they were doing, it was out there. And Kowalczyk may have done that at the time just out of his own personal revenge. I don't know why he did it. But he did it.
Now, at some point in the course of this investigation, did you develop any information concerning Russell Wantz and the Shad Detective Agency?
Russell Wantz and Shad kept surfacing.
What do you mean kept surfacing? They're just throughout the course of the investigation.
Throughout
these
the
names
course,
kept coming up.
our people would tell us information. There was an internet guy. I think he went by the name. He used the name Sticky. All of a sudden, one day, he appears in JP's online, and all of a sudden, this guy
Who's
appears.
JP?
JP Kirsch. He was the city editor.
Okay.
And this surfaced at some point after stories we'd written in which he said, "You're absolutely on target," et cetera, et cetera. And then he began to pose additional things for us to consider. And one of them was Russ Wantz and the Wantz Detective Agency. And his thing was that Wantz had the best knowledge of listening devices in the business. That he was as good as the CIA, I think was the terminology he used, in terms of being able to record and get information.
Who had this? This
Russ
Sticky?
Wantz.
Oh, Russ. Okay,
Yeah,
Russ Wantz.
Sticky is,
Okay.
Sticky's telling us.
Sticky's telling
Yes.
JP about
Yes.
Ron Wantz having all
And
this.
the guy brings some credibility because he says to it, "Now don't go too hard on Stan because he did me a favor once."
Stan Rebert.
Correct. We never did find out what the hell the favor was, but there was some thought that maybe some charge was brought against this guy and the charge got deep-sixed. Anyway, he was pretty aware of the DA's office. He was aware of Wantz. He had made claims at the time. Wantz had a car dealership, at least one, maybe two. Maybe he had the one in Harrisburg at the time as well. Down in Spring Grove, he had a car dealership that he also owned. And I think it was a General Motors dealership. And execs would come in, and Russ Wantz allegedly would provide them with prostitutes when they would come to visit. And supposedly Wantz was then recording and filming the sexual acts so that he would have something over General Motors or over these executives. But what made it plausible, however, was the Keeney situation with the tapes. Plus Ness's own operation. David Ness had a traffic accident, and he went to the Anstein agency. Jesus, I don't know if I can say this.
Do you have a concern with?
My concern is that the individual was never identified.
Okay. What individual?
An attorney in Anstein's office.
Okay.
And if I reveal this information, he's going to be identified.
We just say Attorney A.
It's okay. An attorney in Einstein's office.
Correct. Handled a traffic accident case.
Involving.
David Ness. And in return to pay him, Ness didn't have any money, so he agreed to set him up with some girls.
Okay.
They set him up with a prostitute down in where Ness was running his operation, which was outside of Dallastown in a little strip mall on the second floor again. And apparently what happened was there was a bed, there was a desk, there was something else, and sitting on the desk was a smoke alarm. Except it wasn't a smoke alarm, it was a camera. And they videotaped this attorney. So now they had the attorney under their purview. How did we know this was the case? Attorney got called before the grand jury because it surfaced out of stuff that the grand jury was looking at in relationship to Ness and Delp. And Niles somehow was able to get information, I don't know, it was from the other attorney or whatever, as to what went on there. Again, we didn't see it relevant at that point in time to the storyline that we were pursuing. That didn't mean that it wouldn't become relevant again at some point in the future, depending upon where the storyline went, where the investigation went.
Did you at any point develop information that Mr. Wantz may have been involved with Larry Keeney?
I think that may have gone back to the taping, that Wantz was involved somehow, or his agency was involved somehow with the taping.
Did any prostitutes who you had any of these interviews with over the course of your investigative efforts in this matter ever mention Russell Wantz?
I think so. Again, if you would ask me who it was or which ones it was, I don't remember at this point.
Now, have there been allegations that have been brought to your attention that Wantz has some kind of protection from the York County District Attorney?
That was the assumption, that certainly Wantz had protection from Stan because of the stuff that he had done with and provided him with.
Now, then did you have a conversation with a retired York policeman about how the Shad Detective Agency came into existence? You recall anything about that?
Yes, I did.
What do you recall about that?
I will identify this person. Tom Chapman, who was the former chief of police. He was a police officer at the time, and apparently there was a murder on Christmas Eve going way back in the 60s when Tom was a policeman. And the other police officer was Shad. And Tom had kids, and Shad apparently did not. And this was on Christmas Eve, and they were going to have to do inventory and all this stuff at the crime scene. And Shad told Tom, "Oh, you go home to your kids." And he did. And Tom told me that he thought that Shad found coins that he allegedly confiscated and took then for his own use, which was the basis of starting the Shad Detective Agency. Tom had some early history on Russ Wantz as well. He told me Wantz always wanted to be a policeman. And apparently was a policeman for a short while with the Mount Wolf, whichever police department that was in Mount Wolf. And he applied to become a cop in York City and couldn't get in. And he said that even when he was a teenager, Wantz was an entrepreneur. He apparently had the Gumball Machine franchise as a teenager in downtown York and ran that. And he was always doing favors for cops because he wanted to be a cop himself. And I think Tom used the word squirrely. He was a little squirrely, he said. There was always something a little squirrely about that guy. And apparently he then got into the Shad Detective Agency through Shad. Somehow he had become good friends with him after his son had died, after his son was killed in the riots. And boy, I can't remember the particular details, but somehow Russ Wantz and Father Shad became good buddies, and Wantz eventually got the Shad Detective Agency.
Okay.
And over the years, he built it up.
Now, to your knowledge, does Shad Detective Agency and Russell Wantz, are they involved or provide security for the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Department of Transportation, and the Liquor Control Board? Do you know anything about those relationships?
Only what I've read in the paper. When we had the Wantz angle, it wasn't, there was the link, the quote link back into the prostitution aspect of things, but there was also that there was this strange allegation of things that was going on between Wantz and the district attorney's office. Apparently, at some point prior to my coming to York as editor and publisher, there was allegations that Wantz and Stan, that Wantz had done favors for Stan.
And Stan again is Stan.
Stan Herbert, correct. Including loaning him his motorhome to go on a vacation, that cars were loaned to detectives in Herbert's office. In turn, whenever cars were confiscated, they were stored in Wantz's lot, and the auction would be conducted out of Wantz's lot. In fact, the auctions are still being conducted out of Wantz's lot, except that in this case, the auctions are at the Wantz Detective Agency, not the car dealership. There were other allegations that there were free golf outings and various things like that, all of which were reported at that particular time, primarily, I think, by the Daily Record.
Did you at some point develop information that Mr. Wantz procured prostitutes for visitors to his car dealership? Which I think is kind of what you were talking about before with the executives and things of that nature.
As far as I can recall, they were visitors in the sense that they were from General Motors.
Okay. Okay, now elaborate on that. What do you recall about that?
That he would get visitations from time to time from somebody coming out of General Motors headquarters. I don't know for what reason or who it was. And as part of their visit, he would arrange to have prostitutes. And allegedly that he had also filmed these men having sexual acts with prostitutes, and that therefore had some edge, whatever you want to call it, over them in terms of his ongoing car dealerships.
Okay.
Now, I don't know what that was or how that related with GM in particular, but that was the allegation.
Okay, and in the course of your newspaper's investigation, did you investigate these matters concerning Mr. Wantz?
We were getting into the Wantz stuff. In fact, at one point, I had arranged to have the business reporter interview Wantz for a feature story, and it talked about his antique cars that he collects. I remember the antique cars because that was the picture we got of him. Oh, and I can remember now, one of the reasons we wanted a picture was that he wasn't...
you wanted a picture of Mr. Wantz?
Right, to show around to people, to see whether or not the prostitutes would recognize him.
Now, are you familiar with any allegations, any information concerning a money laundering aspect of this situation involving Mr. Keeney?
Correct. That was the feeling, was that the money was being laundered through this operation. Went back to the $13.7 or $14 million that had flowed through his operation in the course of a year prior to him getting arrested, when they confiscated all of his records. And that supposedly drug money was surfacing in York County and being filtered through the Keeney prostitution ring. because it didn't seem plausible that they could generate that much money from prostitution. And I think that actual money laundering aspect was also what went back to Keeney supposedly in Wilkes-Barre before the grand jury to talk about money laundering in general and what was going on up there.
Now, with respect to this issue of the money laundering and things of that nature, was Russell Wance's name ever connected with any of that bigger picture?
Could have been. I remember vaguely hearing thoughts about where he got his money from to purchase the dealerships.
Okay, so did you believe that there was a link between Wance, the DA, and the whole prostitution ring?
We certainly had sources telling us that, and they were credible.
Okay.
You know,
okay.
we didn't. The problem was, in terms of pursuing this, one was that I got terminated, and two, we didn't have the opportunity to build up the kind of paper trail that needed to be built up. I guess I need to get into this too.
Okay.
What happened here is that Niles Benn told me early on I could not talk to Joe Zerby before stories were printed.
Who was
Because
Joe Zerby?
he's the president of the newspaper.
Okay.
Because Joe Zerby has loose lips. And what's intriguing about it is that Niles is also Joe Zerby's attorney, his private attorney as well as York Newspaper Company.
Okay.
And Niles is so concerned about the suit that he does not want this information public in any way to Joe Zerby. Well, apparently that pissed Zerby off. And as it turns out, Joe was good buddy he was with a lot of folks downtown. He was the good guy, you know. He poured money into the community, did all this sort of stuff and so on. And at one point he gets a call from Stan Riebert. And this was in probably the month of, I don't know when it was, but it was well into the story. And so apparently Stan calls Joe Zerby and says this is illegal and that they're going to arrest me. Subsequent to that, there was a meeting then between me, Joe Zerby, and Tony Tierno, who was the big honcho from South Jersey, in which I was virtually told in no way, shape, or form that this story had reached its limit. Well, I can remember very early on with Niles Benn saying that if I pursue this story, there's a real possibility I'm going to lose my job. And in fact, that's what happened. I lost my job. And by losing my job, it pretty much killed whatever ongoing investigation may have happened. And we were only at the stage where I was encouraging the reporter. We had a bunch of stuff that I wanted the reporter to go after Stan on. And in relation to that, there may have been Wance stuff and questions that we wanted to ask.
Now, what Wance stuff?
Well, which reporter?
Which reporter were you working with?
At this point, it was Mark Scolfuro.
Okay. And what was the Wance stuff?
The Wance stuff related to questions we had about how involved he was with the district attorney's office. District attorney's office, we had questions about what happened to the monies that would come in from confiscated drugs and cars and so on that Stan would get on a yearly basis. And under the law, we couldn't look at that. It's not open to the public. You could just see that Stan would get $280,000 in 1996 for him to expend any way he wanted without the public knowing how it was spent. And it was our impression that this money was not always being spent legally, but there was no way to get to that. But that was one of the questions we had, and whether that money was being spent in some way in relation to services provided by Wance.
Now, what was Mark Scarfaro's role in any investigation concerning Russell Wance?
He was the quote beat reporter that we employed to do this. and ultimately to write stories as a result of that. Scalfaro, somewhere along the line, lost his nerve, I guess that's the best way to put it. Found it difficult to face Stan Riebert.
Did Scalfaro refuse to follow up on the story?
He refused to follow up on a story later involving Stan, in which there were questions in which he was supposed to ask Stan. He didn't ask the questions, and when I queried about him, he refused to follow up on the questions.
Okay. Now, did you at some point have communications with Herb Grofcsik, Police Commissioner, about this whole matter of the sex ring, sex club?
After I was terminated at the Dispatch, and you may want to go back and explore Scalfaro's role in this, there was an incident involving a state playoff game, a basketball game, in which the Crispus Attucks coach was coach of the William Penn basketball team. And they had a playoff game against Eastern School District. And his boss at Crispus Attucks went to the game with her two young girls and got there late and could only be, she stood on the eastern side. And there were all kind of racial epithets were being tossed out of the audience. So she came to me, somebody called me about this because I was heavily involved in the whole racial scene in York County as well. And I wrote a column about it. And when I wrote the column about it, all kinds of other stuff blew up right at that particular time. And apparently what happened as well was there was a kid in Eastern, there was somebody in Eastern that had a website that said they were going to get us. They were going to get me, they were going to get her, they were going to get her kids. So when that came to my attention, I called the DA's office. I said, you know, Stan, here's what's going on here. And actually, I called the FBI first, but they weren't open. You know, York County, there was nobody there. So I called Stan because Stan's wife at that time worked at Crispus Attucks for youth building. And I said, Stan, I think you ought to investigate this. And in fact, they did investigate, and the police found out who it was, who had the website, but they never brought charges. And Stan came into my office and said he didn't think it was serious. So we had prepared an article, but I forget when he came into the office. It was late in the day on a Saturday. The reporter was already gone. The editor was already gone. So I took the story and I inserted Stan's quote to me and a quote from me. And Scalfaro then, who was, quote, union chief, and took that as a violation of something. I don't know what, and went to Joe Zerbe, and apparently had been going to Joe Zerbe prior to this about getting rid of me and the things that I was doing in the newsroom. And the next thing you know, I'm terminated for, quote, putting quotes in a story, which I turned over to the editor of the day and said, here's the quotes, do you have any questions? And there were no questions asked, there was no deletions, they could have done whatever they wished to do with it.
Where does Scalfaro work now?
He works for AP in Harrisburg.
Okay.
What does it mean?
Associated Press.
Yeah, Associated Press, right. Well, I can remember very early on with Niles Benn saying that if I pursue this story, there's a real possibility I'm going to lose my job. And in fact, that's what happened. After I was terminated, I'd become pretty decent friends with Herb Grofcsik. He came to York County after I did to be the police commissioner.
I'm Herbert Grofcsik.
Are you presently employed?
Yes.
And how are you employed?
Employed by the Bureau of Customs and Border Protection, Homeland Security. I'm a federal officer. I was the police commissioner in the city of York from January 1996 until January of 2002. I retired from the Philadelphia Police Department after 33 years of service. During that time, I rose to the rank of a lieutenant. I served various jobs throughout the department. When I retired, I joined the New York City Police Department.
But Herb was an extremely good commissioner in terms of community interest.
Now, at some point, when you were a police commissioner, were you ever approached by Jim Sneddon?
Yes.
And in connection, concerning sex rings, sex clubs, investigations concerning that?
I don't recall exactly how it came up, but Jim Sneddon and I, we were on a lot of community boards and community initiatives, and so we had a close affiliation. We would see each other at least twice a month, maybe even more than that. And he used to go to city council meetings all the time. I was always at the city council meetings. That was twice a month. So during the course of that one time, after he had left dispatch, he and I got together with some information that he had, and he didn't know what to do with, because he didn't trust certain people in authority in the DA's office and other places. So he came to me and asked me how we can get an investigation started on this.
And at one point, I don't know if it was Herb or somebody else, shared with me a letter from the district attorney which was really critical and biting of Herb, and told him to back off on some incident involving some police officers. And after all this was said and done, I went to Herb and I said, there's some things you probably should want to know here about the district attorney and whatever. And I said that, there needs to be a more of investigation of this. It's not going to come out of the Attorney General's office in Harrisburg because they're done with it. They won't go any further. They've got dealt. He's been sacrificed. But there are things that you should be aware of.
Now, concerning the matters where you talked about with Mr. Grofcsik, did Russell Wantz and his involvement in this whole situation, did that come up?
I'm sure it did.
Okay.
I'm sure it did.
Okay.
It almost had to.
Yeah. And again, that being that Russell Wantz was somehow connected with the prostitution activities, the Delp situation, the prostitution ring, the reciprocity club. Is that accurate?
They would all have been part of it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And he and I talked for a while. And when I say a while, it may have been over days, or various periods of time. And then at one point, he told me he was talking to a friend that he had in Philadelphia. And if this friend came out, would I be willing to talk to that person? And I said, of course.
If I recall correctly, it involved investigation done by him and the Dispatch newspaper.
Okay.
And I think it started with Stan Delp. That after that came public, I think what he did as a person in charge of the Dispatch was look further into that with different interviews with certain people, and he had some reporters assigned, etc. And he developed some information. And then when he had this information, he came to like a dead end.
Can you remember what information?
No.
Okay.
I didn't go into the specifics of what he had. He had an envelope stuffed full of things.
Subsequently, a man came out, whose name I don't remember, and we met at the Friendly's restaurant, which is no longer in existence in West York, and probably spoke for 3 or 4 hours. At that time, I gave him copies of all the articles we had printed.
You're talking about the sex ring and
The sex ring, about the Delp situation,
Okay.
about the DA's office, Russell Wantz I'm sure surfaced in that conversation.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to
Yep.
focus on. How did Russell want surface?
Well, because of the links and the things that were there in terms of the relationship with the DA's office and what was going on with the whole prostitution stuff.
Okay, so did you believe that there was a link between Wants, the DA, and the whole prostitution ring?
We certainly had sources telling us that, and they were credible.
Whatever he had developed during his investigation. The developed situation started it, and then he just expanded.
Okay.
So I had my own problems with DA Reber because I didn't trust him. So I think I relayed that to Jim that right now I'd have to look for a different source. And my intention was federal. The reason I didn't go to the FBI in Harrisburg was because we had agents assigned to York Police. We had a DEA agent, we had an FBI agent. I had no reason to suspect they did anything wrong, but because they were there so long, I just felt that they weren't the right people to go to.
With this information from
Right,
Jim
because
Sneddon.
even though I suspect that they were honest people, where they went with the information, I didn't know where they would go. So I was suspicious of the next couple levels. Again, suspicion is suspicion, doesn't mean anything. So I don't know how much longer it was after he presented this information, but I invited the DEA to come into York from Philadelphia. I came from Philadelphia, so I had some connections. Anyway, I got to know Mr. Reichert, and I thought maybe he'd be the contact person because he wasn't from the area. He was from Philadelphia and nothing to do with the area. So I advised Jim that maybe this would be the person to talk to. And we made arrangements to meet outside the city. I think it was on West Market Street in a restaurant. So
Friendly's? Friendly's restaurant?
I forgot which one it was, but it was about 3 or 4 miles outside the city. So no one in the city would see us and suspect anything. And that's when Jim related what he had to the DEA supervisor and turned over this portfolio of information to him.
Okay. And again, did you ever read, review, discuss the contents of the portfolio of information? Okay.
No. Wouldn't have done any good because it just wasn't where we were going in the city. It had to do with stuff outside the city, DA's office, other suspicions of other people in the DA's office, and
Suspicions
politicians.
of what? Do you know?
Wrongdoing involved in the sex club.
Oh, okay. Okay. You did know that there was allegations of wrongdoing involved in the sex club, and that officials of at least county government in a district attorney's office may have
plus
been involved.
VIPs, yeah.
Plus VIPs.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had that meeting, and then we had some hopes that it would go further. You know, we advised the agent that to go over the material and forward to whoever he thought was appropriate to conduct an investigation, and that's the last I heard of it.
Okay. Now you mentioned that you had some mistrust or distrust of Stan Reber.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, when I was appointed police commissioner, we had a hearing, and at the hearing we had 5 council people who were to either approve me or reject me as the new police commissioner. 4 were Democrats, 1 was a Republican. The Republican was Kelly. At the time, he was on city council. He was also an assistant district attorney.
Kelly?
Kelly. Judge Kelly now. Tom Kelly.
Yeah.
During the hearing, I was interrogated by Councilman Kelly, and while Stan Reber was standing by, 25 feet away, watching everything that was going on, which I thought was very unusual. After it was all said and done, Mr. Councilman Keller was the only one who said no. So,
And he was with the district attorney's office at the time.
Right, which I thought was a conflict of interest because he was serving 2 public offices at the same time. So that made me cautious in the future, and in the past I saw 2 other police chiefs sworn in after me, and they didn't get the grilling I got at that time. So I thought it was, after the fact, I thought it was suspicious at the beginning.
Okay.
But I just thought they were trying to reject me for the job because I was an outsider.
Okay.
That was my own reaction.
Okay.
But then when we did our narcotics activities, our joint ventures, we did most of our activity in the city. And we collected narcotics, automobiles, cash, etc. And this was supposed to go into a fund. Part of it was supposed to come back to the city for, police funding of various things we needed, because we just didn't rely on the budget. But it seemed like we weren't really getting our fair share of that. And I asked one of my liaisons with him to mention the fact that we didn't think we were getting enough of our fair share of funds. Well, he got very upset about that. And I was told that he blew a stack because I inquired about where the funds were going.
Okay.
So, and then another time we did we had a DA come in from Philadelphia who took over the, there's an organization in the state that hands out different funds for ventures with police and crime fighting, etc. And I can't remember the name of that. Well, anyway, he came in, and he had knowledge of closing down houses after drug arrests there, and having it turned over to the state, confiscated. And we pushed for that, and the DA only did one. Made it, had a big press conference about it and all that. Did one, and that was it. It didn't do any more. So I really was not happy with him.
Now, is that part of a reason, if there were reasons why you didn't go to Mr. Herbert about the information that Mr. Sneddon had brought to your attention? Well, I think you already covered that, because you said that there were allegations that he and members of his staff were involved in the whole sex ring, sex club investigation.
The reason I didn't go to DA Herbert was because I just didn't trust him.
Okay.
And it wasn't just because of the sex ring allegation. Just from my daily workings with him, seeing what he was doing, I just had a feeling that he wasn't an honest person.
Okay. Now, in your capacity as police commissioner, did you hear any allegations, or can you recall any information surfacing concerning Russell Wantz?
No, the only thing that I'm aware of is that I'm not positive, but I think we had a lease with the Shadow Detective Agency for detectives' vehicles. And they were used vehicles. We had some kind of lease arrangement with the agency. And when it came up, when it was over, we were looking for bids. We asked for proposals for a new lease we put it out in public, and we came back with a lease arrangement with another source for new vehicles for a cheaper rate with maintenance included. And I heard that when he didn't get the contract, he was very upset.
Okay. Are you saying that Mr. Wantz leased you used cars and you got a better deal with new cars?
When his proposal came in for renewal, whatever it was, the bid by the other source was better and included maintenance and other things that his proposal didn't. And it was more than just two. I think there was at least three or whatever. And when we have those leases, etc., they're not just made by the police department. We have to go. I had a captain that was responsible for that, the administrative captain. When we have those proposals, we actually have to go to city council to get them approved, because they're a certain amount of money and over a couple of years.
In the past, was this bid out? How was it done in the past?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
When I got there, this was the standard procedure, and I made sure we did everything by the rules and by the book.
Are you aware of Russell Watts being involved in car confiscations with the drug task force at all?
I think, I'm not sure, that the Shady Detective Agency stored cars that were gotten through drug raids, drug buys. Those were confiscated, and after the disposition of the case, if the person was found guilty, then those cars were sold at auction, I believe.
Okay. Mr. Kiesling says in his book that you believe that these allegations may have been given file 13. What does that mean?
I think what happened was Mr. Kiesling called me a second time, and I think he wanted to know what the progress was, or something or other, or follow up. I'm not sure exactly. And I just said I never heard from the federal agency or Mr. Reichert again. I never made any follow-up calls, and I was hoping that the right people got hold of the information. Something might be going on in the background right now or before, whatever. And I just hoped it didn't get filed in 13, thrown away.
Thrown away. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. What was your concern about the Harrisburg FBI? I think you pretty much elaborated on it, that you didn't mistrust or distrust any of the staff, but they had been entrenched for so long in that area that you felt best to go beyond that. Is there anything more you can add to that?
Correct. I didn't mistrust the DEA agent that was assigned to our detective bureau, nor the FBI agent, but they were there a long time.
Right.
And I didn't know who they would go to with the information. If they would have went to Stan Reber right away, it would have been, that was my main thought, if they went to him right away. And so I just thought that it would be better to go to someone that wasn't connected with the area.
Okay. Now, are you aware that whether Watts provides security for the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Penn Department of Transportation?
I read about that.
You just read about that, okay. And with the information that Mr. Sneddon brought to you, were you concerned as a law enforcement official that further investigation of that type of matter was warranted?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have went to the trouble of making the contact and going outside the city and making sure that we weren't seen by local people from the city. And my expectations were that Mr. Reichert probably did turn it over to some other people, probably supervisors above him, and they made the determination where this information should go for proper investigation. But I don't know that. That's a presumption.